This week's surveillance report covers a U.S. senator's push to repeal the law protecting online free speech that makes the internet what it is. Ransomware gangs are now exploiting React2Shell as a follow-up from the last several weeks. India is demanding government access to encrypted messaging. AI hype being weaponized to justify manipulation and extraction. Apple is still breaking EU law, and a lot more. We have a big week with a lot of updates. Welcome to the Techlore Surveillance Report, your essential weekly tech news, delivering deep analysis on the latest threats to security, privacy, and digital freedom, and empowering you to reclaim control and defend your rights. Let's not waste any time. This is going to require a little bit of explanation, but I promise it's understandable and very applicable to all of you. So the US has something called Section 230. This was passed as part of the 1996 Telecommunications Act, and this has become the center of a lot of political debates in the last several years. Fortunately, nothing has really changed about it, but people are really trying to change it. What this does is it provides limited federal immunity to providers and users of interactive computer services, especially when it comes to third-party content generated by their users. So what that means is if you're posting to Reddit, if you post something on Twitter, if you make a YouTube video like this one, then no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. A good example of this is, let's say that you post something on Reddit. Let's say it's super unhinged and really bad, something that could even be held legally liable. The important thing about Section 230 is that Reddit isn't necessarily responsible for you posting that. There might be repercussions for you posting that, but not necessarily Reddit. I am keeping this quite simple. This is a huge rabbit hole, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the nuances here, but just to break down the story really quickly, this is being pushed by U.S. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, and he said he was moving to file a bipartisan bill to repeal Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. In terms of people against it, we have people like Lindsey Graham and Dick Durbin. Dick Durbin is not a name I've heard, and it does roll off the tongue in an annoyingly good way. And during his first presidency, Donald Trump did call to repeal the law, and he even signed an executive order attempting to curb some of its protections, though it was challenged in court. Now, here's why people might not want to repeal Section 230. So these are kind of the people who want to keep it around. They say that these 26 words of Section 230 are what created the internet and does not provide blanket immunity to internet service providers and still hold them accountable for instances like sex trafficking and hate speech. So it's not just this thing that protects platforms from every problem. They say, however, a repeal in total could mean increased censorship, a flurry of litigation, and a negative effect on innovation and free expression. Quoting this article from The Conversation, MIT management professor Sanan Oral warned, if you repeal Section 230, one of two things will happen. Either platforms will decide they don't want to moderate anything, or platforms will moderate everything. Without the immunity from Section 230, platforms could be held responsible for content that its users post, leading to possible removal of content that they deem may result into a litigation against the company. Experts argue that a repeal of Section 230 could kill free speech on the internet. So just to give a very tangible example before I talk a little bit more about the EFF's coverage of this, let's say, what we talk about here on this channel, digital rights, privacy, security, anonymity, etc. This is actually very timely, and what I'm about to describe isn't realistic right now, but could very much happen in the coming months or years with everything we're seeing around the world. Let's say age verification passes in the US federally, and that means that now everything that could be deemed harmful to minors, including social media, whatever they deem harmful to minors. We've seen the definitions of that be quite vague. Let's say people start getting around these by using VPNs and connecting to other countries with less censorship. Well, now the US might go ahead and try to criminalize VPNs. So then if we put out a tutorial on our channel on YouTube saying, hey, here's how to use a VPN for better privacy. It's not for US users, even though we're based out of the US. Essentially, YouTube could be held liable for that. And YouTube could essentially be sued because they allowed VPN content to exist on their platform that went against current laws. So I see this as personally problematic because actually we are allowed to comment on a lot of issues globally right now. And we have a good amount of assurance that Google/YouTube isn't going to just remove something outright because they're not really incentivized to over-moderate in these kind of ways. What this does is it's going to put these big players into a really tough situation where they're going to feel a lot of pressure to over-moderate a ton of different things that could any possible way be interpreted as illegal or open them up to any litigation, even if it's not strictly illegal. Like maybe VPNs are outlawed for bypassing age verification requirements, but not as just a privacy tool. And maybe we still keep talking about them as a privacy tool, but that still is considered too risky for YouTube as a platform. These are all hypotheticals, but these are kind of the things that should get you guys thinking a little bit about the kind of repercussions of this kind of stuff. Now, the EFF did some good coverage of this as well. They said Congress passed this bipartisan legislation because it recognized that promoting more user speech online outweighed potential harms. When harmful speech takes place, it's the speaker that should be held responsible, not the service that hosts the speech. And they do again mention that this is not absolute. It doesn't protect companies that violate federal criminal law. So they still do have to do some kind of moderation for things that are just straight up illegal, but not from a free speech perspective. The EFF's actually been involved with a ton of court cases regarding 230. If you're watching this on video, you can see some of them. Things like Levitt versus Yelp, Internet Archive versus McKenna, Craigslist versus the Superior Court of California. And these span over the course of about a decade between 2004 and 2013. So the EFF has been very involved in this. Yelp is a really good example here. Many of you might know Yelp. Essentially, it's where you review businesses online. And according to Yelp, most reviews are positive, but occasionally some businesses focus only on the negative reviews. And these displeased businesses turn to legal action against the middleman, not the speaker, in order to censor speech. And that's exactly what Section 230 was created to address. But now, if a business doesn't like a review, they could go ahead and try to sue Yelp if Section 230 is repealed, because apparently Yelp, I don't know, allowed someone to post a bad review about your business. But you see, there's all of these edge cases that could present a lot of problems. And 230, even if it's not a perfect law, overall protects a lot of that speech on the internet, which is a very important thing that makes the internet what it is. So this is something that people really need to be careful about. If you're outside the US, a lot of these companies are based in the US, and I don't think they're going to take the time to try to set up different moderation policies and different legal requirements between different countries. If the US is one of their largest markets and it's the strictest, that's probably just going to become the default wherever they can to make things a little bit easier from a business operations perspective. So this is a global issue, even if it primarily affects the US first. The last thing I want to say about this, in fact, the EFF has a really good infographic that you can share with people. It's just a quick little image. You can see it on screen. And of course, again, you can find that in the show notes. But one of the last points I want to talk about is that innovation would be diminished as new social media platforms and products would face new legal obstacles to getting started. What this means is that, we just shut down our forum on the Techlore side of things. Under these laws, we would have been held liable for anything anyone posted on our forum. And yes, we did moderate our forum to the best of our ability. But if we were held legally liable for something, we don't have the ability to fight that. We're not Facebook, we're not Apple, we're not Google. So there's just this built-in aspect of fairness that isn't really included when you repeal something like Section 230, because all these big platforms have the resources to do heavy moderation, and they have the resources to fight legal battles, whereas small blogs, small forums, small communities don't really have any of that. And so it would also incentivize people away from building their own communities and instead just joining something like Discord, because then someone has to sue Discord instead of just suing a small player who hosts their own forum. So this is something that affects literally everything on the internet, and people should be quite concerned about it if they're following what's happening. I encourage all of you to get involved. Again, please check out the show notes and the sources down in the description, and go ahead and check out the EFF's coverage. I feel like they connect the dots really nicely here, and this infographic is a really easy and impactful thing that you can share with people. So not only should you educate yourself, share this infographic with people, and as always, please, especially us Americans, contact your local representatives. See who represents you both in the House and the Senate, and please write to them, call them, email them, whatever you're able to do, and share why you're concerned about this. Share the communities you're a part of, and share how this would make things so much more difficult for them, and it could censor free speech on the internet. Follow it closely, and we'll be keeping you updated on this podcast, and if needed, as a dedicated video on the Techlore channel. So there you go. And maybe this is a good time to become a lawyer if you wanted to try to profit off of this stuff somehow. Coming soon, we have more crazy stuff happening in India. We have some AI hype that I thought was just beautifully written that I want to talk with you guys about. Apple is still breaking EU laws and global attacks on privacy. So we have a lot more to cover, but I wanted to quickly touch on the React2Shell stuff. Just quick updates here. If you haven't been following the podcast, there was a maximum severity React2Shell remote code execution vulnerability. Essentially, this is something that impacts a lot of the infrastructure that you're running for some services. So this doesn't impact you all as individuals, but if any of you ran anything that used React, this was impacted by that. And so websites that you accessed could have been victim to this vulnerability. And now we're still seeing this fallout effect from this being exposed a few weeks ago. So each week we're getting more and more things come to light. So this next one is that Google has linked some Chinese hacking groups who have been trying to exploit this pretty much across the world. If you're watching the video, you can see all the countries that are impacted by this, the US being the largest person impacted with like 81,000 attacks. There are some ransomware gangs that are explicitly going out and trying to exploit this vulnerability. So if you're using anything that has React in it, or you know any developers that use React, just check in with them. You know, they might already know, they might have already patched it, but be sure to reach out and notify as many people as possible, because there are dedicated people full-time day and night right now trying to figure out who hasn't updated to fix this exploit. And be aware, the internet is run, it feels like just duct tape everywhere, right? If one little thing down here falls, then boom, the rest just collapses. So this is a fantastic system. The internet is a beautiful thing, but keep in mind, there's so much underlying infrastructure laying there. And then when we see these vulnerabilities that impact things closer to the bottom, it has such a cascading effect. And it's one of the most interesting things to cover on this podcast, which I don't know. I know it's like bad and it's not something I'm like excited about, but I do get a lot of fulfillment covering these. They're quite interesting to follow. Before we get into one of my favorite AI stories of the year that I'm super excited to share with you, I had a quick update about India. So India has been kind of on a bad track record these last few weeks. First, they talked about wanting to mandate this government spyware app that was posing as a security app that maybe has some security features, but it forced literally every device to have it and no ability to uninstall it. And it had all these crazy permissions. So that was the first thing they tried. Then just last week, we talked about how India was pushing for greater phone location surveillance by taking the 911, like when you call 911, it actually just pings all the cell towers and uses a much more accurate way to like track your location down to a meter, I believe it is. And they wanted to just have this on all the time and have constant access to it on everybody's devices. Just a normal thing to want, you know, as a government. And now this week, they are trying their third crazy thing. I don't know which of these, you know, it feels like they're just throwing darts at the wall at this point. So I'm sorry if you're in India, but I'll share with you what you should be doing. They are now going after encrypted messengers and requiring a KYC'd SIM card to be used alongside them. Their reasoning for this is they're aiming to curb rising cyber fraud in India, the world's most populous nation. The directions are that they want certain app-based communication services, and I'm going to warn you right now, certain means encrypted. It includes things like Signal, WhatsApp, Telegram. I don't know why Telegram's on the list because it's not really encrypted by default. And they have been instructed to keep accounts continuously linked to an active SIM card and impose stricter controls on how the apps function across devices. These providers must comply within 90 days of their issuance on November 28th, requiring messaging apps to remain tied to the SIM card used at signup. The web and desktop versions of the apps also require users to log out every 6 hours and relink their devices via a QR code to regain access. I wish, like, can you imagine? Just, you have to log out every 6 hours and relink a device. Does that make any sense? That's just awful. So the telecom ministry said that mandatory continuous SIM device binding and periodic logout ensure that every active account and web session is anchored to a live KYC, know your customer, verified SIM restoring traceability of numbers used in phishing, investment, digital arrest, and loan scams. Now, sometimes Meta isn't on the wrong side of history, normally when it involves one of their products, who happens to be on the right side of things, which WhatsApp in many cases actually is because it's an end-to-end encrypted messenger. And so a lot of times Meta is having to fight for encryption, which does help other better services like Signal and all the other ones that we like back here. So Meta has come forward and said, we don't want to do this. This is inconvenience. There's service disruption, and there are many technical feasibility questions that Meta has. However, the way that TechCrunch words this this is that it's going to be kind of an uphill battle for them because there aren't that many things that they can argue legally in defense of themselves and not just complying with this, which is pretty scary stuff. And I think this is where, there's a very polarizing criticism that people have about Signal, and it's the requirement of a phone number. And the reason why I find it polarizing, and I think the nuance of this, is that people think that requiring the phone number for Signal is a problem because of the privacy implications. And I think this might have been true a few years ago before Signal had usernames. But the reality is what Signal does is it hashes your phone number, and even the discovery process for other contacts is overall quite private, but now you can actually hide discovery by phone number altogether and just use usernames. You can even join public groups and people won't even be able to see basic information about your account. It's quite cool. So yes, while having no phone number is definitely more anonymous, and there are other messengers like SimpleX, like Session, like Briar that don't require a phone number, Signal's phone number requirement prevents spam on the platform, and it makes it quite useful and accessible to regular people who are used to phone numbers. And I think that trade-off is pretty good, especially now that you can completely remove the phone number visibility if you want some better privacy. However, there is still a fundamental issue with Signal's phone number requirement, and it has more to do with this. It has to do with the fact that some people don't want a SIM card. Some people don't want to have a phone number. And while Signal is free, you do technically have to pay for some kind of way to have a phone number. And that, for some people, is an additional subscription they don't want to have, and it's a legitimate argument for other services, even like Threema, that have one-time payments, to maybe actually be cheaper for certain users. I don't think a huge number of people fall into this bucket, because I think most people already have SIM cards and phone numbers at this point, but it is something to think about. Now, of course, when we look at situations like this poses another issue with having phone numbers, is that in certain countries, you do have to KYC yourself, and it's not that easy to get KYC-free phone numbers. In the US, we don't really have this problem. You can just get any SIM card, install it, and you're kind of good to go. And in some other countries around the world, it's a similar situation. But in India, it's much harder to get these kind of SIM cards, and it makes services like Signal far harder to achieve with any layer of anonymity. And I know anonymity isn't quite what Signal is going for, but I think it's something that's worth considering and worth talking about as a genuine drawback to Signal. So I think this is a perfect story that speaks to how the phone number requirement of Signal can backfire. And that just means you have to use different tools in those kinds of environments. And our resources at privacytools.techlore.tech kind of, show what some of those other services are that don't require a phone number. I think Session and SimpleX are going to be the main ones that speak to most of our audience members. In the meantime, though, I still love Signal, and it's still my daily messenger, so I will continue to be using Signal. But again, I think the nuance here is very important as to who Signal is for and who it's not for. Now, we have a few more stories here about AI, the EU, and global attacks on privacy all around the world. And of course, a Defense Bulletin. But very quickly, I want to share about our sponsor of this episode, which is EasyOptOuts. EasyOptOuts is a service that removes your information from people searching websites. This information that you can look up if you've ever tried typing in your full name, your address, your phone number on any search engine, and then you see all these random websites that try to share everything about you, your life, your previous history, your employers, your family members. That all comes from data brokers over the years, and there are many services out there that try to get rid of this. But the cool thing about EasyOptOuts is, one, they have been verified by Consumer Reports. They did a whole analysis on all these different services, and many of them did kind of terrible. And the only two that did really well is Optory and EasyOptOuts. The difference between Optory and EasyOptOuts is EasyOptOuts is far simpler and far cheaper. It's right about $20 a year, not per month, and it's not run by a massive company. It's just a couple guys who saw how easy it was to do this thing, and now they're making it accessible to a lot more people. I've been using EasyOptOuts for years, and I don't miss the super high subscription costs of other services. It's been really fantastic, and a lot of other people I've talked to behind the scenes have also migrated to EasyOptOuts ever since that Consumer Reports research. If you want the best bang for your buck in removing your information from these people searching websites and just having it done automatically for you, check out EasyOptOuts down in a description. There is no better recommendation I can give. Even if they weren't sponsoring this podcast and you asked me, I'd have to say EasyOptOuts is the way to go. Check them out down below, and thank you, EasyOptOuts, for sponsoring this podcast. You guys have been awesome for sponsoring it for so long. And now to AI. I'm going to preface this section by saying I'm going to inject a ton of personal thoughts and beliefs here, so be ready for that. And of course, I'm going to also cite real things. But this is something I wanted to get off my chest because it's something I get asked a lot, and I figured it'd be cool to share. And I think that this actually summarized a lot of my views I was unable to put together. And it's about AI and the future of AI, superintelligence, and why we're seeing so much AI slop just thrown at our faces from every possible angle. And I wanted to give a little bit of commentary here. It's a bit different for this podcast, but I didn't have any other place or way to express it. So I hope you all enjoy. The first thing that I wanted to share is just talk about how prolific AI is becoming, and not just in positive ways. We already see, your calculator app getting AI features, your freaking flashlight app, flashlight AI powered flashlight, whatever the hell you're going to be using now has AI built in. It's ridiculous. We don't like it. It needs to stop. But I think it's really concerning to see how AI is also being weaponized in really vicious ways. So we saw this recently. Instacart had, and this is from Consumer Reports, I even had people in my life who don't really care about privacy bring this up with me. Instacart's AI-enabled pricing experience may be inflating your grocery bill, Consumer Reports, and Groundwork Collaborative investigation finds. And I'm going to keep this really short, and you can read the whole article in the show notes if you want to. But pretty much using AI to, depending on location, depending on who you are, depending on how much you spend, depending on what it knows about you, it's going to price things differently based on how much it thinks you realistically pay. And so the same things can actually cost different for different people because of these kind of algorithms that are being implemented. We've already seen how this is used for rent. Yes, frickin' rent. Landlords are using AI to raise rents, and cities are starting to push back. This is from last year in December, and I don't know how successful they were in pushing back, but the reality is that people are using AI to pretty much try to gouge all of you, regardless of what it is, whether it's rent, whether it's groceries, things that already feel like they're gouged. And yes, there is already some writing and kind of speculation, it might already be happening, who knows, about using AI to, quote, improve pricing for insurance premiums. And this is from a service called gradientai.com that I'm showing on screen as well. So I wanted to just quickly share that even if we like AI, there are some really nefarious uses for AI that are very under-discussed. Now, kind of something that I've been asked a lot in the last year or two, and something that I have no answer for, but I just had kind of a bad feeling about was, what is with all these weird, rich tech bros who are talking about all the dangers of AI and how AI is going to take over the world, it's going to be super intelligent, and all these nebulous concerns, while they're literally developing and building the AI tools themselves? It doesn't make any sense. Now, this author, James O. Sullivan, and yes, he does sound like someone straight out of Monsters, Inc., he put together this really nice op-ed. And he talks about how this narrative of, this super intelligent AI has very little to do with any scientific consensus. It's emerging instead from particular corridors of power. The loudest prophets of superintelligence are those building the very systems they warn against. When Sam Altman speaks of artificial general intelligence existential risk to humanity while simultaneously racing to create it, or when Elon Musk warns of an AI apocalypse while founding companies to accelerate its development. We're seeing politics masked as predictions. I'm quoting a lot from the article here, but this sleight of hand is neither accidental nor benign. By making the center of public discourse, architects of AI systems have positioned themselves as humanity's reluctant guardians, burdened with terrible knowledge and awesome responsibility. They have become indispensable intermediaries between civilization and its potential destroyer, a role that coincidentally requires massive capital investment, minimal regulation, and concentrated decision-making authority. And I'd like to remind people that the EU, as of right now, we talked about this last week, is gutting the GDPR in favor of trying to make AI far more accessible and easier for people. So we already see this happening, where this race for AI is deemed so important to the fact that we're already rolling back protections that are built to protect people. The way he puts it is just so brilliant. Consider how this framing operates. I'm quoting again. When we debate whether a future artificial general intelligence might eliminate humanity, we're not discussing the Amazon warehouse worker whose movements are dictated by algorithmic surveillance, or the Palestinian whose neighborhood is targeted by automated weapon systems. These present realities dissolve into background noise against the rhetoric of existential risk, artificial general intelligence, the superintelligence that's always being pushed. Such suffering is actual, while the superintelligence remains theoretical, but our attention and resources and even our regulatory frameworks increasingly orient towards the latter as governments convene frontier AI task forces and draft risk templates for hypothetical future systems. Meanwhile, current labor protections and constraints on algorithmic surveillance remain tied to legislation that is increasingly inadequate. We see this everywhere. We don't see anyone trying to reel in AI's effects on people today. Not on people's jobs, not on people's rent prices, not on people's Instacart, not on people's insurance premiums, only on these hypothetical, nebulous, spooky things that are being presented by just a few people who are developing the tools that they say are going to take over the world. I'm going to finish with a quote. There's so much more here, and I recommend you guys read all of this because it's brilliant, but I'm just going to finish with a quick quote here. Artificial superintelligence narratives perform very intentional political work, drawing attention from present systems of control towards distant catastrophe, shifting debate from material power to imagined futures. Predictions of machine godhood reshape how authority is claimed and whose interests steer AI governance, muting the voices of those who suffer under algorithms and amplifying those who want extinction to dominate the conversation. What poses as neutral futurism functions instead as an intervention in today's political economy. Seen clearly, the prophecy of superintelligence is less a warning about machines than a strategy for power, and that strategy needs to be recognized for what it is. The power of this narrative draws from its history. And my God, this is such a long write-up, and it only gets better, I would argue. Please, please, please read this if you want a really good analysis on all the stuff happening in AI and all of these nebulous concerns, because I've been asked by so many people about this who think that AI is going to be the end of the world and what my views are on it. And I just don't trust anyone who's been pushing that narrative because it doesn't make sense if they're building the tools that they say are going to end the world. And I want to finish out this story by just sending another quick reminder. As they're talking about these nebulous future risks that aren't even really considered real threats at this point in time, there were letters sent to 7 AI firms that cited a study estimating that electricity prices have increased by as much as 267% in the past 5 years in areas located near significant data center activity tied to AI data centers. What this potentially means is that when your utility bill goes up, it might be because some AI company put up some data center that they're not rightfully paying for, and they're passing all that cost onto you. Just like they're passing the cost onto you when it comes to groceries, just like they're passing the cost onto you when it comes to rent, just like they're passing the cost onto you when you're paying your insurance premiums. And to avoid anyone getting outraged by any of this, they're pushing out this narrative that, oh my God, we need to be focused on this future threat and not the ones impacting people right now. The reason why I love this story so much, and I think it's one of the most important stories I've covered all year, is it finally solves the equation for me for AI. I think AI has genuine use cases and can be used for a lot of good. I read from a lot of researchers who I have a lot of respect in, who have already implemented AI, and they've discovered new things as a result of AI. We use AI back here to check some of our scripts before we send them out, and sometimes the AI catches really obvious mistakes that we didn't catch ourselves. So I'm not anti-AI, but some things just felt very off about the way that AI is presented from these big tech companies for a long time now, and I've never been able to quite put all the pieces together. And this article just did it beautifully. So I think if any of you are as confused as I am about AI, you should give this a read. And I think it's going to really answer a lot of questions for you. And if you don't like my views on AI, share why. I'd be curious what you guys think about all this too, because it's a pretty interesting topic. I'm going to quickly touch on global attacks on privacy as just an overall story, but I just wanted to do a quick signal boost. This is from Crypty, and pretty much they signed something along with Proton, Threema, and 20 other organizations with an open letter that they sent to Apple, pretty much saying that Apple is still breaking the law. They're still functioning as a gatekeeper. They're not respecting the DMA, and what they're asking for is for Apple to simply comply. It's got a lot of good coverage too from the Register and even Reuters, so if you want to look into any of that, check it out below. And it's just a quick signal boost for a lot of services that partnered on something pretty cool right now. Now, I don't have infinite time, so I might do dedicated coverage for some of these stories on Techlore in the coming days. So stay subscribed to the YouTube channel if you're interested. But this story 5 is just kind of a compilation of many of the different attacks we're seeing around the world right now. So the UK is encouraging Apple and Google to put nudity blocking systems on phones, which is just as scary as it sounds. They want technology companies to block explicit images on phones and computers by default to protect children. A little side note, with adults having to verify their age to create and access such content. Ministers want the likes of Apple and Google to incorporate nudity detection algorithms into their device operating systems to prevent users taking photos or sharing images of genitalia unless they are verified as adults. In that case, send whatever you want. Yeah, this is bad. And again, there is a lot more to this. So please, for these, we just don't have that much time. So for these stories, if you want to learn more, please check out the show notes so you can read more about them. The EFF, Open Rights Group, Big Brother Watch, and Index on Censorship has called on the UK government to reform or repeal the Online Safety Act, which has a lot to do with what we're seeing right now in the UK when it comes to age verification stuff. Section 702 of FISA in the US is also kind of resurrecting a little bit. Both parties from US lawmakers on Thursday warned that the FBI's continued access to Americans' communications without a warrant under this controversial surveillance law risks turning a foreign intelligence tool into a standing engine for domestic spying. And so they're concerned about how this is sweeping up a lot of information about Americans, all without a warrant and without any kind of transparency. So read about that if you want to learn more. And on a similar note, there's a group that represents the US travel and tourism industry that warned Monday that a proposal to require millions of foreign visitors to provide social media handles used over the last 5 years. I can't even find that information if I had to supply it. Could have a chilling effect on visits to the US. Really? That goes without saying, right? This is a policy that's being proposed that, yes, would require this kind of stuff for everyone who visits the US. And of course, I would want to remind people that when combined with things like age verification and no more anonymity on the internet, these laws get along way too nicely, right? Like if you try to age verify everybody in a country so all their digital identity is tied to one person, you can't create alias accounts anymore. And if you use a VPN to get around it, those might be banned as well. And then if you try to travel to a different country, they're going to ask for all those social media accounts and it's much harder to use them using pseudonyms or anything else. It really demonstrates the complexity of the internet and how some of these laws have so many nefarious downsides that play along so nicely with some of the other downsides of other laws. Now, the EFF did really good coverage about trends to watch in the California legislature. So it's good and bad. There were some good wins, but also there's stuff on the to-do list. There's some problematic bills that are coming out of the California, which is dubbed the Corporate Cover-Up Act, which would gut California's wiretapping statutes by allowing businesses to ignore those privacy rights for any business purpose. And California is not immune to some of the age verification stuff that's being proposed. So there has still been some talks about verifying age for people in California as well. It is not as far along as we've seen in places like Texas, but it's still something that needs to be followed. So if you're in California especially, keep an eye out on this stuff. This is still very early on, but Reddit is actually suing Australia's new social media ban, which requires anyone over 16 years old anyone under 16 years old to verify their age. But yes, also over 16, because as we've talked about, to verify ages, you have to verify everybody's ages. So actually, both of the things I said were somewhat true. But Reddit is saying they are not a social media platform, so they don't have to comply with this. So just quick thoughts on this are, we'll see if they can get away with that argument. And also, I hope that the way they're approaching this is a way that will actually attack the law itself and not just try to defend themselves and save themselves. There are ways that these companies can actually attack the laws that would set precedent to make those laws perhaps illegal or no longer valid in most situations. But Reddit might be going at this in a very protective way. I'm not super familiar with the story yet, so if more developments come out, I'll be sure to share more. Quick signal boost. Denmark plans to severely restrict social media use for young people. So again, Australia passed this. We're seeing this talked about in other places. Theirs is even more aggressive. It's anyone under the age of 15. And that would probably set some kind of precedent for the rest of the EU. So please, please, please keep an eye out on this. And if you're Danish, you should be reaching out. Okay, and now we're going to get into the Defense Bulletin. We're going to start with some general updates on threats as well as data breaches, and then we're going to get into some of the service updates. So very quickly here, Google and Apple rolled out an emergency security update after some zero-day attacks were found. So if you're using any iOS or Google devices, be sure to update ASAP. The next couple stories are about web extensions, and please remember, everybody, the context that your web extensions have a lot of permissions and can do a lot of nefarious things in your browser. So you need to be installing these things very carefully, and hopefully these stories speak to that. So there are 8 extensions that harvest full AI conversations over months. And actually 7 of these were still up as of Tuesday. So these are free extensions. They provide functions like VPN routing, ad blocking, ad-free browsing, etc. And they assure you that it's anonymous, it isn't shared, but it's actually just collecting tons of data and selling it to data brokers and marketers. The list of the extensions from the Chrome store are Urban VPN Proxy, One-Click VPN Proxy, and Urban Browser Guard, and Urban Ad Blocker. So if anything says or starts with urban, take a look. And actually the names I just listed off are the same for Edge. So really it's more like 4 extensions that you could find across 2 different web browsers. So please take a look at that. And again, just do a quick audit on the web extensions that you have installed and make sure they're from trustworthy companies that have real business models and are transparent and very forward about what they do and don't do with your data. Similarly, there's a new campaign that's dubbed Ghost Poster, which is hiding JavaScript code in the image logo of malicious Firefox extensions with more than 50,000 downloads to monitor browser activity and plant a backdoor. So please, for both of these, and this actually comes from the same security company called Koi Security, I believe. Let me check that. Yes, Koi. Some of those include things like free VPN forever, screenshot saved easy, weather best forecast, CRX mouse, gesture, cache fast site loader, and tons of other things here. So please, if you use any kind of weird extensions and you want to just cross-reference some of them, go ahead and check them out in both of the articles in the show notes so that you can see if you're impacted or not. Data breach. There was a data breach at a credit check giant 700 Credit, which affects at least 5.6 million people, which impacted their names, addresses, date of births, and social security numbers stolen in a data breach at 700 Credit. This was a big one. It's called the Coupang data breach. Coupang is essentially the Amazon of South Korea, and this impacted 33.7 million customers. There was some research done that found over 10,000 Docker Hub images were leaking credentials and auth keys. So be sure to read into that if you use Docker for anything. Home Depot exposed access to internal systems for a year. This was caused by a published GitHub access token, which when they tried out actually gave them access to private source code repositories for everything that they did. So that was kind of an interesting data breach there. The French Interior Ministry confirmed a cyber attack on their email servers. So that's something else to follow if you're interested about that. There was a cyber attack that disrupted Venezuelan oil giant PDVSA's operations. This impacted operations, and I don't think it was tied to data. And all I'll say about this story is this cyber attack comes amid escalating tensions between Venezuela and the United States. Last week, U.S. authorities seized a sanctioned oil tanker with Venezuelan crude, the first such seizure since the U.S. Department of Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control. Thank God there's an acronym called OFAC, sanctioned PDVSA in January 2019. So I asked myself, who might have been behind a cyber attack? I don't know. SoundCloud, the audio streaming platform, has confirmed a data breach after member data was stolen and VPN access was disrupted. They say that this impacts roughly around 28 million accounts. So be sure to look into that if you have a SoundCloud account. There's a Japanese e-commerce giant called Ascool Corporation, Ascool, and they were impacted by the ransom house hackers that stole around 740,000 customer records. So check that out if you use this retailer. There's this company that has these photo booths and they exposed customers' pictures. As of Friday of last week, they still didn't fix the problem. So TechCrunch didn't actually dive into too many technical details. But yeah, I hope that they figure this out. There was a fake torrent for Leonardo DiCaprio's One Battle After Another that hid malicious PowerShell malware loaders into the subtitle file. So yeah, you can see here on screen, it looks like a typical SRT file. And it even has it looks like what actual, subtitles, but then there's this random command that's injected into there, and it pretty much it runs a script. It does bad things. So just be careful about this stuff, guys. I just want to make sure you're all safe if you download things like this. This isn't the update I was expecting this year, but remember that LastPass data breach that impacted almost 2 million users in 2022? Well, the UK finally fined them. They fined them £1.2 million, and that took them how many years to do? So yeah, I don't call this justice, but it is something. There was a hacking group that is attempting to extort porn site Pornhub after claiming to have stolen personal information belonging to the website's premium users. I don't see a number for it, but this is definitely a big one if any of you are premium users of this platform. Okay, and now service updates. Now we're going to start with the most polarizing story and just get less polarizing with the service updates from there. And I think the reason why this one is polarizing is really a matter of coverage and perspective, because we get things like from Foronix, who the headline just says Mozilla names new CEO, Firefox to evolve into a modern AI browser. And that's kind of that. But then I think you get something from TechCrunch, which labels it as new CEO says AI is coming to Firefox, but will remain a choice. I feel like the latter one is a little more accurate. So I recommend you all go to the actual source on this one, which is from Mozilla's blog. And I am not saying it's any less polarizing. It's just I think it's probably the most balanced version of this, which is they are going to move forward with a lot of the AI stuff, which we talked about last week and the week before, but it is always opt-in, it's always a choice, etc. Regardless of how you feel about this, because I'm not that interested in AI browsers myself, the fact it's a choice is good, and the fact it can be used with any AI models is good, and the fact that there are probably forks that are just going to cut this all out, I believe Zen Browser already said they're going to cut this out, is also good. So those are the kind of my quick stances on that, but that is something that came across my desk this week. System 76 has launched their first stable release of Cosmic Desktop and Pop! OS 24.04 long-term support. So if you use Cosmic, check that out. This is a final reminder from Mullvad VPN that they are fully removing OpenVPN support starting January 15th, 2026. That means they will no longer have any OpenVPN servers, period. So definitely watch out for that. We recently talked about how the Tor browser is evolving the way they do alpha releases. And so we do have a new alpha release, Tor browser 16.0 A1. So check that out if you are running Tor browser alpha, which you should not be doing unless you have a very good reason to do so, because it is not stable. Kali Linux 2025.4 was released with 3 new tools and some basic desktop updates. These tools are BPF Linker, which is a static linker, Evil WinRM Pi, if I'm not saying these correctly, but don't kill me, a Python-based tool for executing commands on remote Windows machines using the WinRM, and also Hexstrike AI, which is an MCP server that lets AI agents autonomously run tools. So pretty cool stuff, as well as some desktop environment updates that you can see on screen. Couple updates from Notesnook. They released version 3.3.6, which brings Wrapped, which is kind of like a summary of all of your note stuff in the last year. And they also partnered with Tuda with some discounts, which also means they've partnered with Entei, Addy.io, and Kaji as well. So that's pretty awesome. I don't know how many people in our audience actually use this service, but just in case any of you did, Google is ending their dark web reports that alerted you about leaked data. They say that it wasn't useful anymore. So not sure if any of you use this, but that's just a kind of a heads up. And now this is another service that will join Google's graveyard. Similar to Notesnook, Entei is doing something called their Rewind, which like kind of shows you like fun stats and fun photos from your year. So that's something cool. That's kind of what a lot of people expect nowadays, which I think is actually pretty cool. And then I wanted to finish off the week with something actionable, especially in light of the holidays. If anyone still wants a TV, or perhaps you want to ask someone for a TV, Ars Technica did a whole thing about sick of smart TVs, here are your best options. And they talk about how to break free. And so the first thing they talk about is using dedicated devices to replace, so something like an Apple TV or Roku, etc. And you can use those to replace whatever your TV natively has. But they do talk about how to find a TV, and they talk about different brands and where to look for them, projectors, computer monitors, and other things that you can use to still have a non-smart TV without all the crap that comes with those. I've actually made a whole video about how I hate smart TVs on Techlore. That was made several years ago, but it aged very well, and I think it's only aged better with time. That's some of a good fine wine right there. And that, my friends, concludes this week's Techlore Surveillance Report. If this week's podcast helped you reclaim control, you can become a Techlorian by visiting the link down in the show notes. You'll gain access to our exclusive communities, you'll get key perks, all while keeping the podcast growing and free for the world so that people can be educated and keep up with what's going on. Everyone can also take a moment to leave a rating and share this episode to spread digital freedom to someone they love. And of course, no matter what, I always like to remind people the holidays are coming up soon, so make sure to share a story or share some talking points with people at the dinner table about anything happening locally near them. Thank you all for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode of Surveillance Report.